Hello, everybody. Welcome to Monday Night Live. Tonight, I've got one of the original members of the Monday Night Live club, Tim Durkin. Tim was there on the 23rd of March 2020 when we opened the club, and he's original member. Tim, that's absolutely fantastic. Tim is actually a professional educator, like many of us that come on live, always looking for new information, new knowledge, new wisdom. And Tim has studied so many people, particularly Stephen Covey, who we're going to talk about in a minute. Tim has written many books, appeared on many podcasts, and taught and all over the world, but particularly in the USA. He's a sought after speaker, a go-to expert on leadership. Tonight, Tim and I had a chat last week about what we were going to talk about, and we decided the work of Stephen Covey was just so powerful from this book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, sold millions of copies around the world. And Tim was described by Covey as his mentor. What an accolade. I'm just going to mention the seven habits just to remind everybody before Tim takes over. Number one, be proactive. Number two, begin with the end in mind, which was one of those tenets of NLP. Put first things first, prioritize, think win-win. Well, where did that come? Where did I get that from? Seek first to understand and then to be understood. I think that's a real Dale Carnegie title. Number six is synergize, which Tim's going to talk a little bit more about. And number seven, sharpen the saw, which we're all doing here. Tim, thank you so much for rejoining us. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And we look forward to hearing what you've got to say about Stephen Covey.
Well, thank you very much, Derek. Hello, all of my friends at the chat show and the club. It's just a pleasure to be here, especially on this day. This day means a lot to both of our countries because it is Remembrance Day. And I would first begin by pointing out that I am wearing a Monty Poppy that was gifted to me by our very own Amy Rowlandson for a minuscule contribution I made to her wonderful book, which is called Focus on Why. And this is from the Royal British Legion. And I didn't know such a thing existed, but I will treasure it for the rest of my days, and I will wear it. I have worn it all day today. I put it on the suit when I put the suit on, and I will put it on my shirt after this show. So it's very meaningful. With regard to Stephen Covey, the book, The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, I actually read in the late 1980s. I met Stephen in 1986, and he came to our company and he was beginning to teach classes, and he had not written the book yet. He was just starting to write the book. And I shouldn't have been in the class because at the time I was not a manager. Okay. I went in the class, which was for managers only, but I was a new enough employee, and the other employees were nice enough not to ask me why I was in there. So once I was into the first class, then I could stay for all the other classes. And I talked to Stephen, and I had a background in educating for Xerox and IBM at the time. So and the key component of Covey's program is that you teach the principles that he talks about, which actually became the Seven Habits. But Stephen and I kind of hit it off. I talked to him afterwards. I was very curious about these things. The Seven Habits resonated with me. I do believe that they are more valid and way more important now than they were when he wrote the book. That's why I'm glad to have the second edition, which has additional insights from his son, Sean Covey, who I also happen to be friends with. Of all of his 9 children, Sean is the only one that I know, and he is president of the organization now that his dad founded. I do want to talk about the 7 habits. The first one being proactive. As you know, this was the seminal moment for Stephen when he read a paragraph that said there is a gap between the stimulus and our reaction. And he said, it doesn't have, in that gap, you have the final freedom, which he learned from Viktor Frankl. You know, I like to say, you can't control your first thought, but you can control the next one, and the next one after that, and the next one after that. And that's proven to be incredibly effective for me. Stephen and I did talk about Viktor Frankl. He introduced me to the wonderful book, Man's Search for Meaning. And it served me very well when I had diagnosis that I didn't want to hear, when I had events that I didn't want to hear, when I got served with divorce papers I didn't want to hear. I couldn't control my first thought, but I controlled the second one, and I chose something to be proactive. So you don't have to go stimulus reaction. You can go stimulus pause. What response should I have? Because we have responsibility, and then do response instead of reaction. That was very important to me, and I think that's probably one of the best ideas. Beginning with the end in mind is know what you want. When I coach, I often ask people, what do you want? And they're very good at telling me what they don't want. We're very good at telling people, including myself, well, I don't want this and I don't want that. Well, that's great, but what do you want? And that takes focus and so on. The next one is putting first things first, which is your priorities. And in Covey's world, Covey's organization, and in mine, it's family first. Now, when I was in the military, and yesterday was the 249th birthday of the United States Marine Corps, and I mention that because the United States is only 248 years old. So it's when you're older than the United States. I don't know what they called it back then. They couldn't have called it the United States Marine Corps. But at any rate, when I was there, my focus was the people around me. Wasn't God, wasn't country. It was caring for the people around me, and they cared about me too. But with it where I am now, it's family first. Okay, some people also put God first. I respect that deeply. But what is your first thing first? What is your priority, and how can you prove that it's your priority? All right, a lot of people say priority is peace, but they war at dinner. All right, thinking win-win. I don't know, there's a guy around here who wrote a whole book on win-win, but the thing about win-win is to settle for win-win. Don't settle for compromise, because compromise is counterfeit. Compromise means that when I know your ox is gored as much as you gored my ox, in other words, when our pain levels are presumably equal, then we'll settle. And we've had recently a bunch of strikes in the US with parcel delivery people, with railroads, with Boeing Corporation. And it all comes down to compromise so that nobody is happy. Well, what Covey talks about is finding a solution where everyone is happy. The next one is seek first to be understood, that to understand, and then be understood. It means listen. And it is so hard to listen because most of us merely wait to talk. When you take a breath, I will declare you a listener, and I will start my response. And that's never a good idea. But I do have a quick, fun question. And that is, who was the prime minister on January 1st? Excuse me, what was the name of the prime minister of England on January 1st, 1980?
Margaret Thatcher.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Keir Starmer.
1980.
Yes, sir. Because the question was, what was the name of the British prime minister on January the 1st, 1980? He was born in 1962, September 2nd, as a matter of fact. My question was, what was the name of the, excuse me, what was the name of the prime minister of England? He was born Keir Starmer. I did not ask you who was the prime minister. Have I confused you?
No, I think I've just about got it. I think I just about got that.
Well, in the United States, I would ask, what was the name of the president on January the 20th, 1980? And people go, Reagan, Carter, Reagan, Carter. Now I said, no, at the time, or right now, it's Joe Biden. Okay. So the question was, the point is, how well do we listen? How can we tamp down the interference? Because we think we listen, we think we hear, and we answer a different question, go in a different direction. If we don't know what the exact question is, I recommend that we say, could you tell me more? It's a very powerful phrase, powerful question. Tell me a little more. Okay, it's not defensive or anything like that. I just want to be clear on that. And it's up to me to be clear as opposed to you to be clear, especially when I'm teaching. Synergize, I'll talk about in a little bit, but I definitely want to talk about sharpening the saw, which is about personal, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual renewal. In this day and age, it's as important as it has ever been. Actually, the European countries have much, much better food than we do in the United States. More than 60% of the food Americans eat is ultra processed. And there is a reason for that. It's very interesting. I just read a long, long article on that. It's when the cigarette companies discovered, or excuse me, when they lost their case and the advertising and all of the marketing was of no effect anymore, that smoking is bad for you. There's very, very few people that pick up cigarettes anymore. Young people for a while, but cigarettes smoking went way, way down. When I was 16, I got a pack of cigarettes on my plate. It's just normal. So did my brother, so did my sister. We'd start smoking as teenagers. Luckily, I stopped. But when the cigarette companies saw that they were going to be in very much trouble, they bought all the food companies. They bought Kraft Foods in the United States. They bought Nabisco. They bought all of these companies. All of the major food manufacturers are now owned by cigarette companies. The cigarette companies found ways to make more money with less food. So they bioengineered everything. And as a result, 60% of our American food is ultra processed. It barely qualifies as food. So that causes a really big problem with health. 50% of Americans are obese. They are, and 95% of the prescriptions that big pharmaceutical companies in the US sell are for chronic conditions. In other words, for high blood pressure, for obesity, for this, for that, for the other thing. And so it is just, it's just amazing how important it is to sharpen our saw physically. I've had friends, and Tony, was it somebody in the Golden Gate Breakfast Club? Somebody said that they made a trip to a European country and they ate European food or food in this country for 5 days and they felt like $1 million. And she was convinced that it was that.
I would agree with that. I mean, I hiked on, the Camino, ate and drank all the food and the wine and everything else, and I lost 20 pounds and I felt amazing. The food there is just phenomenal there.
And it's real food too.
And it's real food.
So at any rate, I want to go back to Synergize, because Synergize is habit number 6, and it's the one, it's not the least popular, but it's the least one talked about. We always hear about begin with the end in mind, putting first things first, but Synergize is where we need to be, I believe, right now. And before I jump into that, I want to jump into this theme, this thread. In the theater, they call it a through line that is throughout Stephen's book. And it's PC balance, P/PC balance. The P stands for production, and the PC stands for production capability, sometimes production capacity, but production capability. What he's talking about there is if we want production, we have to guard our production capability. For example, if we want to work hard, we have to eat well, we have to get rest, and so on and so forth. That's why sharpen the saw is in there. But with regard to P versus PC, he uses the example where he bought a lawnmower, and after 2 years, he mowed his lawn for 2 years, didn't pay any attention to the maintenance, and after 2 years, the lawnmower fell apart, didn't work anymore. We all have that. If you don't take care of your car is going to stop. Trust me, I forgot to change the oil. I didn't forget. I was too busy. I was too this, I was too that. And I didn't have time to take my car in for an oil change. And guess what? They will stop on you. And then you have a very big thing. So, are you guarding and taking care of your production capability? But let's forget machines for a while. Let's talk about our groups, our families. If we're parents or if we're grandparents, are we taking care of the production capacity of our grandchildren, of our family members, of our spouses, partners, significant others? We have to nurture all of that if we want a productive relationship, if we want productive family, if we want productive team, productive company, organization. It requires a great deal of attention to the PC. So he talks about that. Now, synergy is a word invented actually by Buckminster Fuller. He invented a lot of other words because he was frustrated with the English language. And by the way, Stephen did credit me with introducing him to Buckminster Fuller, whom I believe everybody should know about. Einstein called him the smartest man that ever lived, or that was alive at the time. But he talks about synergy, where he said the greatest falsehood in the world is that 1 + 1 = 2. It doesn't. Okay, if you take one man, one woman, or whatever you want to take, 1 + 1 is greater than 2. It's always greater than 2. Okay, it's 3. In nature, you take one plant and another plant, put them near each other, you have 3, 4, you have a field. Okay, so he talks about synergy. 1 + 1 can equal 8, can equal 32. It just depends on how strong those ones are. And I think that we should be going in the direction of synergy in all of our relationships, where we can be bigger. I'll give you an example. Me and you. I joined this as a single individual. I joined this group as a single individual in 2020. And the synergy, the expansion that I have experienced, it blows my mind. Okay, I have lifelong friends from this group. I came to speak, and then I came to listen. And what I have learned about not just the British culture, the world culture, Slovenia, Estonia. I didn't know that we don't worry much about the Ukraine war spilling over near us, but it's a big issue with you. We don't know that an embargo, an energy embargo, hits you much harder than it hits that. So I'm learning all of these things. And as you know, every single person, the one thing we all have in common, we're all lifelong learners. We ascribe to the Greek principle of paideia, which is learning, lifelong learning. And the synergy in this group is amazing. And I had the opportunity to contribute to Amy's book. I met Marcus Dibbleby. We are very fast friends now. He also, by the way, is sporting one of these Monty poppies. So synergy is everywhere if you put it in place. And I believe that it's the most important thing at this time. One of my favorite poets, I respect Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Emily Dickinson, William Wordsworth, Walt Whitman, all of them. But my favorite one is Jalal Muhammad Rumi, born in 1208. And he wrote something that, as soon as I read it, It's stuck in my head. It doesn't go away. And it's so appropriate for this time because we live in a fractured world, certainly in the UK and definitely in the US, as evidenced by our last several elections. And the way it's gotten in the US, speaking only to that which I do know, is that if you disagree with me, you're wrong. And I'm right. It's like, I think I just saw my friend, Mr. Who else is here? I can't see all the names anymore. But anyway, let's suppose it's where did you go, Tony? Okay, Tony. Tony is in favor of gun control. I'm not in favor of gun control. Tony's wrong. I mean, how could that boy think that? That's just not right. Somebody else may be in favor of the very incendiary topic of women's freedom to choose. I think it's wrong to abort a baby. If that was my position, by the way, I'm not revealing my true position all the time. If I disagree with you, you're wrong. If you disagree with me, or if I disagree with you, I'm wrong, etc. You get the point. It's crazy because if we move beyond thinking about in that way, we can have progress. We can have synergy. We can't have it without it. So Rumi says, and it's so beautiful, out beyond the ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I will meet you there, because when the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to even talk about. I just think that's so beautiful. And how do we get into that field? How do we get past me telling Carl he's wrong on that, him telling me I'm way wrong on this? Well, let me just ask you a question. This is a tennis ball. If I were to ask you, what is the shape generally of this tennis ball, what would you say? Concave or convex?
I'd say round.
Okay, well, you can say round, but I think I saw Jill, if I read your lips well, you said convex, okay? And all of you would say convex. And if I asked you what color it was, you'd say yellow, right? Yeah. Well, the people behind me disagree completely. They say you're wrong.
Concave on the inside.
Okay, now, how does that happen? How can I see that difference? I have to change from having a point of view to having a viewing point. This point of view will make sure that I am wrong. Holding only a point of view will show I'm wrong. Having a viewing point will show I might really be right, or you might be right. And the way that you go from shifting from point of view to viewing point is you have to change your position. You don't have to keep in another position, but you have to change in position. You have to move. And changing in position requires courage, because you might be proven wrong. You might be embarrassed. You might be surprised. There could be all kinds of stakes if you have the courage to change position. But as I tell my leaders, you have to have a point of view. You have to focus on things. But when somebody says something different, or you're looking at solving a problem, you're applying creative, critical thinking, as Nigel and I and Tony have been trained, you have to have a viewing point. You have to pull back and change your position. And the final point I'll make on that is understand the three-position way of looking at a problem. The first one is your position.
Mm.
So Carl and I are talking about some issue, okay? I want to tell him how I believe this should happen. and why it did happen. So I'm looking at it from my perspective. Now, if I had the courage, I would then go and say, Carl, tell me your position. Or if Carl wasn't there, I'd think, what does Carl see? What does Carl think from the way he feels? And that's called position number 2. But position number 3, if you want to create synergy, is the most exciting one. It is outside of both of us. Position 3 is looking at Carl sitting here, Tim sitting here, talking about these things. Tim is talking about his position. Carl's talking about his position, his thoughts, but you are sitting here as a consultant. It's often called the consultant's position. And you're saying, what do I see and what would I tell both of them if they were together about what their positions that they're holding? Third position is incredible for solving problems because it gives you the viewing point that you can say, oh, there's more to this than I thought. So the 7 habits, more important than ever. Synergy is, I think that time has come. And again, I would just like to repeat, out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Because when the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to even talk about. Thank you. I'll take any questions you have.
Tim, thanks so much. That's absolutely brilliant. Loads of questions to come in, but I'm going to stop the recording before we do that because we are actually out of time on this podcast. So if you don't mind staying on and
As long
joining
as you want
later for more questions, that would be fantastic. But I'd like to ask members of Monday Night Live to give you the usual thanks in the normal way. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. If anyone wants to get in touch with Tim, it's the usual way, timdurkin.com. He's a great friend of Monday Night Live. Always pleased to talk to anyone on Zoom, to answer emails, etc. And Tim, we're looking forward to welcoming you to the UK. I will pick you up personally at Heathrow and drive you wherever you want to do. I've known you since the 8th of January 2007 when we shared a beer at Marco Island University. Tim Durkin, thanks for joining us.
Are we done?